Okay, thank you, Sue, and welcome everybody who might be out there in cyber world. Let's go back, sorry. Excuse my sort of technical abilities. So my name's Jason Dunstone, the Managing Director of a research agency called Square Holes out of South Australia, which you can obviously see on the screen there. We started business at the end of 2004, almost 8 years ago. Earlier that same year, February 2004, Facebook was born, and in February 2005, YouTube started. So we've seen a massive amount of change in terms of social media. We've had a little bit much smaller growth rate, but it's been interesting watching the changing consumer and the media landscape, and really in terms of how we're interacting globally. I guess from my observation of the willingness for consumers to share their lives and to have conversations with their friends, family, loved ones, and even people they don't know. Definition of market research up on the screen right now, and then there's thousands of definitions of market research, and I'm sure you've all got your own that you use for your stakeholders, clients, etc. The interesting point from my perspective is that the definitions very rarely talk about the methodologies, they typically talk about the outcomes. So they very rarely talk about the methodologies like surveys, focus groups, ethnography, whatever it might be. They talk about the outcomes. They talk about understanding consumer needs and preferences, about new product development. They talk about making better advertising, better websites, improving customer satisfaction. So it's about the outcomes rather than the methodologies. The thing I've loved about market research over my almost 20 years in the field is it always feels new and fresh. I actually think I sort of reflected on this a bit. I think as a market researcher, we're quite inquisitive and we're questioning and we're always looking. And I think in a lot of ways, many of the market researchers I've met, there's a degree of positive but insecurity in trying to work out where we fit in the world. And I find when you go to market research conferences and even events like this, it's that thinking about new and fresh ways to understand consumers and that passion that comes from that. And I guess I sort of question that we're talking about new market research today, but a majority of market research still, in my understanding, is still surveys and focus groups. So still largely around, even if there's sort of adjustments to those approaches, yes, we're moving more online, but still there's still surveys and focus groups. The challenge market research has is it's almost improving the bar or increasing the bar all the time to improve how we deliver insights and how we provide value to clients, because anybody can do a survey with do-it-yourself applications and survey applications. There's more market research being conducted than ever before. Unfortunately, a large proportion of that is not conducted by professional market researchers with the questionnaire design and analytical skills, research skills, being able to conceptualise it down. I had an interesting chat with a colleague from an advertising marketing background, a creative consultant, and I was talking about how, from his perspective, market research had changed. He was in his late 50s, had a very successful marketing career, still very active. He said the growth, the demand for consumer insights is growing exponentially, but no one owns it. And I think this is an interesting thing for market research, is that everybody owns consumer insights and moving in. I guess it's the question of going, well, are market researchers doing what they can to own the voice of consumer? I've got also another point on the slide about talking about consumer data is more prevalent than ever. There's more consumer data. It's about knowing, well, are we accessing that consumer data as well as we possibly could? And I guess also the question is, are we partnering the right organisations, the right fields, and also upskilling our teams in the right ways? Yeah, so we're looking at qualitative and quantitative, but are we moving to other fields like IT, legal, etc.? This is from our observation of just the thought process about social media, about Should we be involved as a brand or as an organisation or as a marketer? Should we be involved in social media? So I'd go back a few years ago when the GFC was coming along and digital was starting to be talked about a little bit more, but it was more pockets of chatter about Twitter and Facebook and the likes and the impact it would have on marketing. So there was a lot of discussion around should we, shouldn't we? Should we be involved? What's the point of it? What's the role of social media within marketing and communicating? I think we've largely moved on from that, but I think there still are marketers and organisations thinking about should we, shouldn't we, what's the strategy behind it. Most have moved on to that, yes, let's do it, whether it's, I had a conversation recently with a PR company talking about they advise their clients to do it because Facebook and Twitter and the likes are here to stay. And if they don't stay up to date with these types of social media, they're going to lose touch with it and they won't be ready for the next big thing. So but most organisations are understanding, yes, we've got to be involved in it in some way. Moves on to that third point about going, it's about engagement. So we have a lot of conversations with marketers that I'd say even 12, 18 months ago, or even advertising agencies, more traditional ad agencies, talking about we don't get it, have moved to go, it's about engagement. So it's about having a more sincere, open, trusting relationship with our consumers. You can't talk about sales, you can't talk about tacky things that might make them feel uncomfortable. It's about sort of bringing the consumers into your world and yourselves into their world. And then we move on to sentiment monitoring. So as Ray was talking about, positive is discussion around our brand or the issue we're involved in. Is it generally positive? Is it generally negative? But it's really watching that discussion going through. Moving on a little bit more about going of some boards and CEOs asking, well, are we actually getting a return on investment in our in our involvement in social media. So now we're outsourcing our social media, our Facebook page, we're spending a large proportion that's coming away from our traditional advertising. Are we getting a return on investment? So deeper measures of are we getting the bang for the buck? Click-through rates, can we measure some way or other of sales? How can we measure that? And there's certainly Ray discussed a few of those points. Here's where I'm coming from. We've had a few over the years, many discussions, and certainly in recent times talking to CIOs in an area obviously different to market research, but starting to talk about social media as research data. And I think Ray was talking about this to some extent, but I think it's just an interesting point of going, can we use social media as research data? Much the same as we would use survey data and other, or loyalty program data. Can we use social media data in that way? Then we start potentially to be able to have a deeper consumer understanding online and offline. So can we understand the Facebook followers of a page to allow us to better understand the consumers offline so we can market them better and attract more customers, new product development, so what other products and things are they liking other than, for example, Coca-Cola, what else do Coca-Cola consumers like? Behaviour change, so what would encourage people who smoke to quit smoking. Digesting the bigger picture, larger groups of consumers to get down to who the target consumers are, for example. The slide I've got up now are looking at last week 10 Facebook pages and the largest number of likes. So largest number of likes on Facebook. So you can see the only FMC brand is Coca-Cola with 52 million likes. Others are singers, Facebook's got a couple there, YouTube. The column I'm particularly interested in, there's two. One, total likes, and the next one along is the people talking about this. I'd say that the people talking about this, which is people who are liking updates, who are commenting on posts, who are liking pictures, who are sharing posts going through. So that's the people talking about it. So you can go through and you can look at Coca-Cola, wow, people talking about this 778,000 people, this is wonderful, that's great. But then you look at the next column I've got down there with an oval around it, an orange oval, and that's the proportion of people talking about this at the total likes. And you're talking about between 0.3% and 3%. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the engagement rates are actually quite low. So one question is, what about the other 97 to 99%? What are they saying? Who are they? What are driving them? How can we get a better understanding of those guys? And it's also the conversation that those between 1 and 3% are going, well, is that representative, as Ray was commenting about, is that representative of all consumers? Facebook Insights data, I'm sure many of you have accessed there. If you've got a Facebook page, you can get some great things about demographic profiles, where they're coming from, who's engaging with the site, who's sharing things. So you can get some great stats there. You can also download data, and you can also sort of get some nice snapshot summaries, but they're not getting down to the depth of like CRM data or survey type structure of data that would be able to sort of do a rich, deep exploring of consumers to the extent that we're traditionally used to. And I guess this is just our perspective. The sentiment analysis is a highly valuable tool. So knowing, one of the arguments of being involved in social media is to at least be aware of the conversation going on around your brand. So if you're not involved, you'll have no idea whether the conversation is positive or negative, and certainly if you're a more prominent, larger brand, you need to be aware of that. But largely from, I guess, my perspective, is sentiment analysis is great, but it's generally positive, negative. It doesn't allow once again, the deep exploration, cross-tabulation, segmenting, analysis, looking for opportunities that our traditional statistical analysis would provide to us. So the question about should we be involved in social media from a marketing director, CEO level, moves from just being about engaging consumers with questionable levels of, is it actually going to provide a value to our business? At the moment, we're in this beautiful phase where many organisations are saying, yes, it's about engagement, but what about 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the time when it actually isn't increasing sales, or it's not increasing shareholder value? The question comes through there. But if we've moved that thinking to go, well, it's not just about engaging, it's also about understanding consumers and how can we develop products and marketing from it, I think we get a much more of a easier sell in terms of CEOs, boards, etc., accepting the value of social media, Facebook, etc. Some stats on the screen at the moment from Facebook's prospectus in February this year. Obviously, they needed to disclose some figures earlier, but I'm not going to go through all of them. But essentially, with one of them, 2.7 billion likes and comments per day. From a researcher's side, I look at this and I think, wow, that's a lot of content. That is a rich amount of data that we've got there, but are we accessing that to any real extent? And yes, we can look at it from an ethnography or a netnography perspective, but are we using that data to do the analysis that we would typically do with big data sets? So more data is available than ever, and potentially we're able to move from being about the data collection, which many, or 5+ years ago, market research was largely about, can you help us to collect a survey data set or do some focus groups and collecting the data that way? We can move from going, yes, we can still do that, but we can have more of a focus on the consumer insight generation, which is what most market researchers, particularly young market researchers, want to do. So we move from the collection of the data to about the insight generation. The questions from my perspective are twofold. One is, do market researchers have the skills to access the massive volume of social data? So that's the first point. And the second one, to analyse and visualise the data to provide insights. I think the second point, yes, yes, and improving. I think there's more discussion, there's more availability of tools like Tableau and the likes that allow us to visualise the data. There's more acceptance of our need to provide consumer insights, that we're not just about collecting data, we're also about providing those great insights that the client could not provide themselves, and why there's a value to using a professional market research firm. So I think that's improving, but I think generally market researchers are skilled at conceptualising data. The first point I ask questions about whether we do, and whether it's reasonable to expect market researchers to have those skills. So we start to move our thinking from being about a very traditional set that I think mainly we still are as a market research industry, qualitative, quantitative stats, field management, etc., 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 to moving on to concepts like data artists, data scientists, programmers working with APIs. Most of the social media, Facebook included, are quite open about the use of their APIs, and Foursquare, etc., accessing their data. So it's how can we access that data to become data scraping, to be able to go through the sites and be able to scrape data from social media, for example, into CRM-like structures that we can, and visualizing skills. So changing the way we think about what consumer insight is. So moving from market research to business intelligence. So the focus moves beyond market research methodologies. And I think even when we're talking about, most market researchers still talk within a silo-like mindset. So how can we start talking with a voice of IT, other methodologies, both in terms of innovation of approaches, but also in terms of technical skills that we can't expect to get. So most market research techniques, a market researcher can understand, a quality can expand into other areas, a quantity can expand into other areas, but it's understanding areas that it's not realistic for us to move into, things like reward card modelling and big data performance architecture, which are concepts that we shouldn't be expected to know everything about, but we should know who to partner with or what skills we need to resource. So we start moving from fans on Facebook, for example. Facebook's obviously the most prominent social media platform so far to date. So Coca-Cola, etc. So how can we use those platforms to start using their APIs that's sort of quite open? Most of these social media platforms have instructions on how to use it and how you can use this data and create applications to interact with the consumers much more effectively. The question is, are market researchers doing that and accessing that big data? So we start moving to Facebook and other social media being about accessing a filtered set of interested consumers. So yes, so interested consumers, whether it's Coca-Cola or whether it's, so Coca-Cola might be able to look at Pepsi's and sort of work out, well, who are the consumers who are interested in Pepsi versus our consumers who are interested in Coke. So it's looking through those areas there. You can see on my list over to the left of demographics, so we can get a deeper understanding of the demographic profile. Can we segment more the family structure? So doing influence maps of the family structure, the friend network. Who are the influencers out in cyberspace? Like using clout scores, for example, and bringing that into the equation, the analysis, looking at likes, what other pages are they liking, what other issues are they interested in. And then we get down to things like emotions and conversation, where some of the business intelligence tools allow us to contextualize conversations. Is it positive? Is it happy? I guess it's sort of taking in the tone of voice in different nationalities, for example, of sarcasm, for example, knowing how you deal with that. But certainly there are abilities from a business intelligence tool, from IBM, Oracle, etc., to allow us to be able to do that. But market researchers don't necessarily have the capabilities to do that at this point in time, generally speaking. And the focus moves from this, in terms of people talking about this, so engagement, to the total number of likes. So that almost becomes a sample size. That's a sample of people who like Coca-Cola. The point on, so, and it also moves from more, whatever it takes, to a robust sample. So we want those likes to be people who actually do like Coca-Cola. There are possibilities now that you can pay a fee of $500, $1,000. Obviously, I'm in Australia, so I'm talking dollars. To buy 50,000 Facebook likes. Those 50,000 people aren't I think it's reasonable to expect them not necessarily to be connected to your brand or your issue. So strategies need to be adopted, promotional, product, to be able to, it's pulling those likes in so we get that sample up there. Yes, you need to still engage with them, but we're trying to get that sample up so we can understand them better. But it's not that easy, as we've already talked about. Now, this is a page off Facebook's site. Facebook is very protective of their data. They talk about it being very protective from a consumer member side, but I think it's very protective from taking some ownership of that data going through. So I'm not going to go through, but it basically the first line, automated. So they're protecting harvesting bots, robots, spiders, scrapers. So going through for the use of that data. Down the bottom it says, clicking here will take you to an application form to apply for permission to engage in automated data collection. So it's going through there. The question from my side is, and this is the point that Ray was mentioning before, of who owns that data, what can you use, what are the ethical sort of and legal points around it. So does Facebook have a legal leg to stand on? There are a number of case studies online and elsewhere about Facebook being very threatening and domineering about anyone using their data in a way they don't like. The attorney said that they would the attorney said they were just about to sue us into oblivion. Are Facebook just scary monsters? So what are the legal rights? I guess what we're saying here is get legal advice when you're doing this sort of thing. Don't just take what they're saying as gospel. Who owns the data? Does Facebook own the data? The issue really comes back to privacy, and I think the great thing we've got as a market research industry is we've got a history of understanding concepts like de-identified data, understanding consumers' right to privacy. So we wouldn't want to access consumers' private social media data, but if it's public, is that okay? So I think it's about the question that needs to go on the industry, but my issue would come in if we're using it from consumer insight generation within an organisation. I have no problem with that. When we start selling and start doing it for the wrong reasons, I have an issue. There's a line that needs to be drawn. But I think we've got a history as an industry of the market research, privacy code and the code of professional behaviour in Australia. I think we don't have a dubious background, and we tend to jump on people who do dubious things to consumers. We know the value of privacy and getting consumers to be quite open. So the issue becomes about collaborating and upskilling our team and adopting new models to overcome technical complexities of surfing the wave of social data. So that's a big statement. Basically it's about going, do we upskill ourselves as a market research agency or company, or internally within the consumer insight division of a larger brand or a brand, for example, or do we collaborate with other teams such as IT teams, etc. And it's embracing different innovation processes. They're not being stuck on the way that a typical market research study will be developed to develop a methodology to track or to do a deep dive study. So it's looking at, we've got 8 steps going through here. This is more of an IT process. It's about opportunity identification, trial requests, so requesting this with the stakeholders, approving that trial, executing the trial, qualifying the trial. Is it going to work? Do we continue on any further? Do we formalise this project? Building a proof of concept and then approving that proof of concept. So being less caught up in writing a methodology for 4 groups and survey work and we're going to track it over time, to thinking broader about what does innovation mean in research, and allowing brands or organisations to be able to innovate, but taking it away from being about research, typical research methodology development. So my wrap up, social media moves from engagement solely and sentiment towards consumer data. So social media also, second point, keeping social media followers, the sample clean. So we're not just bringing in people who don't have any interest whatsoever in the brand. So not bringing people in for the wrong reason or the wrong competitions. So new skills and innovation models are important. So how do we adopt those? What are the skills and innovation models? What are other disciplines that we could bring into our world? We've been dealing with a chief information officer who was really excited about working with market research and marketing because he believed he's on that boring side. But the stuff that he knows about pulling big data is stuff that we could never know. So it's about understanding that there are people out there with a passion for what we do, but with different skill sets. Get legal advice, balance the cost and benefits. Is it willing to go to war over this? Or how do we deal with that data? Can we deal with it in a more of a confidential way? And creatively generate ideas and new market research strategies. Just a final point, Mark Zuckerberg, great quote I think from a couple of years ago. He's talking about 500 million people. I think it's exceeded that now, but I think it fits really well with what we do as market researchers. So I'll read it through. Right now, with social networks and other tools on the internet, all of these 500 million people have a way to say what they're thinking and have their voice be heard. That last line, have their voice be heard, is what we do as market researchers. So how can we do that, and how can we be more innovative? Thank you.